Hey, what's happening, family? It's your man Mark Black. I know Morning Joe's a little late this morning, but I told you I want to try to set this thing up to where I can give you guys a little bit more information, and I've been pretty successful in doing that. Um, First of all, um, I wanted to talk today briefly about this thing that we've been seeing whenever we bring up the need for America to pay its debt to us as ADOS folk. One of the things, other than completely deny our justice claim or try to do some bullshit, is they try to add other folk like you know Africans who are immigrants here, um, but one group in particular is pretty damn problematic, and that group is so-called Native Americans or Aboriginal Americans or Indians or whatever the case you want to, whatever the case may be, you want to call them. The reason why this group is problematic for me as an ADOS man is that I've got a bit of difficulty caping for a group of individuals that when they have their shot, when they have their opportunity to align with ADOS folk or support ADOS folk, right? What we see is that they consistently align with the people who are the descendants of those who took their territories, pillaged them, so on and so forth. Um, we are told that it is time for America to not just address black people. America needs to address the Native Americans. They need to honor the treaties and so on and so forth, right? They tell us that we need to support the right of Native Americans to receive remuneration, compensation, and so on and so forth, right? Again, asking ADOS folk to be the mules of other groups, specifically in this group, Native Americans or First Nations or Aboriginal Americans. Now, before I continue this video, I need to make something clear. Whenever we speak about historical actions and things like that, we have to, in some instance, speak of in generalities, right? Sure, were there specific groups that we can point to that have done X, Y, and Z? Absolutely. And in those cases, we should point to those groups, and I will. But just as people can try and extrapolate behaviors, tendencies, and so on and so forth from ADOS folk based on the behavior of some ADOS folk, why then we should feel free to extrapolate thought processes, behaviors, motivations, and so on and so forth from other people based off of the actions of individuals. In other words, family, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If we can be held to account collectively for the actions of, say, one or two or a few ADOS people, right? Like, for example, this appellation of criminal across our entire tribal group, right? Our entire ethnic group, because black people commit crime, right? Thus the term black on black crime, which is a misnomer because crime is simply crime. If you understand the statistics in America, you know what? Fuck that digression. Won't go there. That's going to be a topic for another video. But my point is, family, is when we have these discussions, right? One of the things that people will try to tell you is that, well, this tribe didn't do that. So what? Right? Doesn't matter. The fact that any ethnic group or any tribal group was a part of oppression, tyranny, and disrespect of ADOS people means that any one of them could have been. In many cases, there are instances of brutalization, tyrannization. There are instances of Native American groups that aligned with and worked for and on the behalf of the nation known as America that was never documented. Simply because it was never documented doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means we don't have any information about it. And we do have group or information on certain groups that did. So right there from the get-go, I want to tell you that I'm speaking both specifically and generally about this issue. As an ADOS person, right, as a member of the ADOS tribe, I have a real fucking problem with being told that I need to support Native American rights and Native American claims against the United States government for a few reasons. One of the first reasons is that there are Native American tribes who are just as culpable for the brutalization, the enslavement, the tyrannization, the just all the stuff that came with slavery and its after effects. You've got Native American tribes who are right there on board. Here's an article right here I wanted to show you, family. Here's an article from Al Jazeera where it talks about how Native Americans adopted slavery from white settlers. Now, one thing I want to share with you is this. They tell a mixed narrative when it comes to Native Americans, right? Because it depends on the person's bias, how they actually run this information down historically. This is what we know historically speaking. There were Native American tribes who were aligned with, worked with the various white settler groups from West Asia, aka Europe, that came here, right, to help initiate and maintain and sustain the system of slavery. That's what we know as a fact. That's undeniable in history. There were groups of Native American tribes who acted as slave catchers, right? Who would go after runaway slaves and return them to their respective owners. There were groups of Native Americans that actually owned slaves. Specifically here in this article, 5 nations are mentioned, right? The Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creek, and the Seminole. Now, I've heard people say, well, the Seminoles were a mixed tribe. They fought for black people too. Yeah, okay, right. Whatevs. But they also had slaves. But the narrative that they try to tell, depending on your bias, is that natives were either co-opted by white settlers, right, by European settlers into supporting the institution of slavery, or you read something similar to where they also too practiced slavery and kind of melded their slavery systems into the systems that the Europeans introduced, right? I think both are true. I do think that there were natives who learned about slavery or enslavement from their contacts with Europeans. I do also believe that there were some forms of slavery, just like there were some forms of slavery that existed in Africa prior to the arrival of the Europeans, right? And so some of those groups that practiced slavery just simply overlaid or transferred their slavery ideas to their interactions with the European. One of the things that we hear from apologists of the Africans involved in the slave trade is that, well, yes, they had slavery in Africa, but it was a different type of slavery, right? We read stories about, tribes where some of the highest ranking members of the tribe had to be slaves. Like in the Ghanaian Empire, believed that the general of the army had to be a slave. A free man could not be the general of the nation's army or the empire's army. And shit like that. But all told, what it boils down to essentially is this. Native Americans to various degrees, had no fucking problem with the brutalization, the enslavement, and the oppression of my ancestors as an ADOS man. None. They had no issue with it. As a matter of fact, because they are treated in this country in a way that we aren't as ADOS people, they're treated as sovereign nations even after emancipation, formal emancipation in the United States. The Native Americans weren't required to give up slavery until treaty signed in 1866. I've heard anecdotal stories of slaves still being held by Native American tribes as late as 1869. But even if you discount all of that, even if you say that's just history, right? Even if you're not concerned about, you know, shit like this, right? How the Europeans encouraged tribes, joined up with tribes who were slavers, and so on and so forth. So even if you discount all of that, right? One big problem I have with supporting these motherfuckers in any claim they make against the United States government is that when they started getting opportunities for growth, for example, in the gaming industry, i.e., casinos, gambling, shit like that, right? One of the first things these large tribal groups like the Cherokee and others did was take the descendants of their former slaves who, under the treaties, had citizenship rights as Cherokees, right? So they want to talk about honoring the treaties when it comes to them, right? Return to us the Black Hills, give us our ancestral lands and so on and so forth. They want to talk about honoring treaties when it comes to them. But in treaty obligations that they had to the enslaved and ADOS, right, the American descendants of slavery in their tribes, they had no problem ending those treaty obligations. The Cherokee did it in 2003. I believe the Chickasaws and other tribes rapidly followed suit, where they just simply disenrolled or unenrolled the descendants of slavery from their tribes. So when they started getting an opportunity to come up again in this country, right? When they started to kind of turn the corner and do things differently, the very first thing they did was ensure their opportunity and their capability to continue injustice against their descendants of slavery, the Indian descendants of slavery, right? Native American descendants of slavery. So, yeah, I feel some kind of way about them asking me to support their claims when now that they're starting to maybe get examination, a second look for whatever justice they feel is due from this country, the very first thing they make sure to do is to make sure that somebody that looks like me can't take advantage of it. You've got black folk, descendants of slavery, who speak Cherokee, who speak and read Cherokee as their first language, not their second, who had their inheritance taken from them, not just by white folks. They had their inheritance stolen from them by Native Americans, by Cherokee, by Chickasaws, by Creeks. So I hope now that you get a little bit of understanding as to why I have a real problem with supporting these motherfuckers in anything they're trying to do. They have never, in the main, supported me and my people. So turnabout is fair play. Make your own justice claim. Hold your own nuts. But stay the fuck out of ours. That's all I wanted to say on it. It's your man, Mark Black. Links in the description below to both of these articles here so you can read them for yourself. Make sure you purchase some merchandise or click one of the links to support your brother financially. And until the next time I see you, I want to wish you love, peace, prosperity, and power, real power to our people.